What is up, guys? Welcome back to CageChat MMA. We're here, of course, to recap what happened over the weekend with UFC 281 and a little bit of Cage Warriors also. Let's not forget what happened at Cage Warriors this weekend as well. We had two bumper cards, one in Manchester, one in New York in MSG. And of course, we kick off MSG. But first of all, let me just thank you guys for 1,000 likes on the Facebook page. The growth in the past month has been tremendous, but do keep following. Our target is 2,250 followers by the end of this year. So if you're watching, do hit a follow. If you're watching on YouTube, Instagram, or any other platform, do go over to Facebook and drop us a like. There will be a link in the description, especially of the YouTube video, and in the description of the YouTube. But let's go back to Saturday night. Of course, UFC 281, Madison Square Garden, New York. We had two title fights on the line. We had a fight of the year contender, and it was an astonishing card from start to finish. On paper, it was fantastic. In reality, it was even better. It was one of those cards that really cemented why we like this sport, why we love this sport, why we tune in and week out to watch MMA and watch the UFC. The matchmaking was on point, the storylines were there, the narratives were there, and we had some very, very key sort of chapters emerging. And of course, one of those chapters was, Alex Pereira becoming UFC Middleweight champion now. Alex Pereira defeated Israel Adesanya for the third time in his career, first time in MMA. And this time, it was almost a repeat of their second fight in kickboxing, of course. Israel Adesanya comes out of the first round, looks decent, looks on his game plan, looks strong, as does Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira didn't come out look like there was potential maybe he'd come out almost like a rabbit in the headlights because of the main event, because of the size of the MSG, the size of the event, the media that he's had this week. I doubt, or maybe I would imagine it was one of the toughest weeks of his life. Professionally, with the media attention and the obligations that he would have to provide. Now, of course, you've got someone who's as talented and experienced as Glover Teixeira by his side to almost coach him and coach him through this week and give him the pointers of, do this, do that, rest here, rest then. He would have been there and done that. He's been in the sport, a decade and a half, if not longer. So yeah, Glover Teixeira would have been a benefit to that, imagine. But he came out strong. Israel Adesanya did take the first round. And this is where the similarities and the sort of mirroring of the second fight in kickboxing sort of started off. At the end of the first round, Israel Adesanya almost gets him out of there. He hits him with a lovely 1-2, a measured 1-2, and it rocks Pereira. And he's thinking 15, 20 seconds left on the clock. He might have got him out there in the first round. Puts the sort of the previous two losses to bed. Enough to the point where the narrative would have been, oh, he's just had 4 or 5 fights in the UFC. He's come over too soon to stand in this octagon with me. I've had 23 professional fights in this sport. Okay, he beat me twice in kickboxing, but I'm the king of the middleweights in this sport, in this organization. But of course, the bell went, and we come back to the second round. And the second round was Alex Pereira's. He looked strong. He looked recovered. He looked rejuvenated, and he looked more confident of the fighter. Again, the nature of this week, Adesanya's been in many more main events. He's been at MSG. He's been at the highest caliber locations and events that this sport has seen, and he's shone in all of those occasions. But there was points this weekend. Again, hindsight is 2020. There's points where you go, maybe we saw a human Adesanya. Particularly the walkout, of course, he used the music from Saw, and you're thinking, okay, is this could be the vintage Adesanya that we saw against Whittaker, that we saw against Paulo Costa, the showman that he is. But he came out walking to the octagon like a soldier, like someone who was zoned in, dialed in, knew that he had a task in front of him, and what was in front of him, and was aware enough to be, to show the respect and the professionalism, to walk out there, again, similar to Whittaker. I think he knew he had the beating of Whittaker, and he came out with that more elaborate performance, that dance, which, makes us all a fan of Adesanya, those who do support Adesanya, they make us a fan of him. And there was none of that. It was all, straight to business for him. But yes, the second round was Pereira's. His striking looked crisp, his striking looked good. He's the only man that I've seen in the octagon with Adesanya that has matched him, if not bettered him, for size, at least in the middleweight division, because obviously got Jan Blachowicz, but in the middleweight division particularly, Pereira's the only man I've seen match him physically. And of course, he had the mental upside of knowing he'd already beat Adesanya twice. And he knew, you know, again, when you share the ring or the octagon or any sort of professionalism or sporting moment with anyone, but particularly in combat sports, when you share a piece of yourself in the ring or the octagon with someone, that lives with you both forever. It connects you together for their careers. And, Adesanya will now always have that 0-3 against Alex Pereira. It'll always be, Alex Pereira is better than you. It doesn't matter what you do in this sport. You could win 16 more times, match Anderson Silva's record, which now seems impossible at the moment. But you could do that, and everyone goes, well, you lost to Alex Pereira 3 times. It doesn't really matter. We know he's better than you. He might not, achieve more as you. He might go and lose his next title bout. But for Adesanya, the point is always going to be you lost 3 times to Alex Pereira, and fairly so. But yes, back to the fight. Third round was Adesanya's, and this was the point where you saw maybe an emergence of why Adesanya is the champion, why Pereira is the challenger. He took him down. Okay, it wasn't the best takedown. Neither of these are wrestlers. It wasn't like... It reminded me of the flip side of what we saw between Colby and Usman back at 246, maybe. I probably got that wrong off the top of my head. But if you remember, two, quote-unquote, two of the best wrestlers in the welterweight division coming out and they get us a kickboxing bout in that first fight because they know the strengths of each other. So they're trying to find a weakness, and obviously both Colby and Usman, their weaknesses, so to speak, was in the striking, and they tended to use that more. But we saw the grappling that Adesanya probably, maybe more his first takedown on his resume in the UFC. So it shows you how little he's had to use his offensive grappling. It's been more so when he's up a cage to defend and against grapplers that he's used it. But yes, Adesanya took the third round, and it looked like he was going to overtake and start coasting like he usually does. No dig at him personally. I think, again, we mentioned in the preview, he's the champion. His job is to win, not to entertain. And again, Pereira came out in the fourth, and he came back into the fight and looked fantastic, looked great. Looked a little bit tired here, a little bit jagged. Looked like he was in his first main event, probably first 5-round fight. Maybe the pressure was getting to him. But it also looked like he was maybe coasting and getting ready for the 5th round, getting ready to come back into the 5th round. He survived the 4th. Survived probably is a loose term with survive because he was never really in danger in the 4th round. But he came out in the 5th, and he looked the bigger, metaphorically and emotionally the bigger person. He came out fantastic chat from Bellator in the corner, and he came out and he took the title away from Adesanya, similar to what Leon Edwards done to Kamaru Usman. And it shows you the brutality of the sport, because when Leon Edwards done it to Kamaru Usman, I was cheering, I was jumping around the living room, because obviously we'd just seen another British champion crowned. Whereas this time I was on the other end of that, seeing one of my favourites, if not my favourite fighter, get finished. And it was a good stoppage. Mark Goddard is top 2 referees in the world, and there was a couple comments about he let the Gastelum fight go on. One, Gastelum was still sort of functioning. He was operating. He was moving around the cage. He was trying to defend himself. He was getting back up, albeit he got knocked down 3-4 times in that last final round. But he was doing enough to warrant Mark Goddard not to step in. Whereas on Saturday, it was slightly the opposite. Adesanya didn't do quite enough. If he'd moved his feet, I think, if possible, of course, in that situation, it's now impossible to know where your bearings are, to know your environment around it. But listening to Adesanya saying he was lucid and aware of what was happening, I would like to see him maybe circle out if possible, maybe throw it. And this is where his grappling probably, or his lack of grappling probably let him down. Because if you're a Khabib, if you're a Kamaru Usman or Daniel Cormier, you push into your opponent and you grapple up and you get the underhooks in and you just weather that storm. We only had 3 minutes left on the clock to survive, and it would have been and still. But no, he tried to duck and dive his way out, and a couple clipped him. Of course, he just got up from that sort of it probably was a knockdown, but again, perennial nerve issues. Again, reflected back on the Conor fight with Dustin Poirier. He got hurt, but of course his calf and his leg was, inadequately, attacked. No, that is the game. That's the sport we play. And that movement, caused Adesanya to slip and fall down the side of the cage. But he was in danger, and Mark Goddard got it right. It wasn't an early stoppage. If anything, he probably stopped him from getting knocked out in a similar fashion than Conor done. And it's just unfortunate for Israel Adesanya, because he's going to have this exclamation mark on his career now that Alex Pereira is a better guy, even though if they have an immediate rematch and Adesanya goes out and finishes in the first round, it's still 1-3 to Pereira across their careers, across sports. Doesn't matter that it's 1-1 in MMA, especially now with 2 finishes on Pereira's side as well. Again, back on the preview, it reminded me of JJ versus Valentina. Valentina just seemed more wet. Well, Valentina just is the better competitor, better fighter out of those, and that happens in the career. Sometimes you've got someone who has that mark on you, and continues to have that mark on you. We'll have a look at the statistics. Of course, 119 strikes landed from Israel Adesanya out of 209, 86 out of the 162 of them significant. Of course, Pereira had the more volume with 140 out of 214, 91 out of 157 significant. Both of them had a takedown each, but as you can see, Adesanya did control that third round, which gave him, what seemingly looked like the scorecards in his favour, and I believe he was 3-1 up when the fight was over, of course. So he would have been getting to a 49-46, if not 48-47 at best. But that's not how this game works. Pereira got his hand raised and new, and it's going to be interesting what this middleweight division done, because as we just saw in the lightweight division, Charles Oliveira loses the title, Islam Makhachev comes in, and everyone the Dustin Poirier that we'll talk about in a minute, Justin Gaethje, those that have fought Charles Oliveira and lost, and now back in contention because there's someone new at the helm with a different skill set. And now with Pereira up there, you got Robert Whittaker, chomping at the bit, probably number one. Well, no, yeah, probably number one contender, if not number 2 contender, with Adesanya dropping down to number 1. That would be respectful. Adesanya wouldn't drop him down to number 2 immediately, especially having 2 wins over Whittaker. But Whittaker's right there, and it's a shame that the fight with Paulo Costa has already been booked for Perth in Australia, because, pardon me, if I was the UFC, and it would be wrong to do this, I'd rip that contract up with Paulo Costa and say, hey, Robert Whittaker, you're on a 2 if not 3 fight win streak. We'll double check that. But of course, he looked fantastic in his last fight. He's been at the top of the food chain, for a while now. It's just Adesanya's been in his way. But of course, now there's fresh meat there. Whittaker's next in line for the title, in my opinion. Of course, he's got to go through Paulo Costa, which I believe he will. But he's 3-1 in his last 4. Of course, the Adesanya rematch sandwiched in between the Gastelum and Vettori win. But Vettori Gastelum Cannonier decisions, fantastic. And Darren Till in there also, since the original Adesanya loss. But yeah, it's a little bit, maybe not the ball drop, because I saw Robert Whittaker said he wanted to be on that Perth card, he wanted to fight in Australia, and Paulo Costa is the guy that we stand in front in the octagon. But a part of me wishes that fight hadn't been made, and the main event in Perth, or if not the co-main event, but probably the main event, knowing these two, it'd definitely be a co-main event with Volkanovski and Makhachev at the helm. But Whittaker versus Pereira for the middleweight title in Perth would have been perfect. It would have been a fantastic fight. I would have said maybe too soon, but it's 3 months away, so that would have been perfect, I think, especially for Whittaker. For Pereira, I don't know, but Pereira's been active, hasn't he? He's fought, every 4 months really, since he got into the UFC. Every 4 months on the dot. So March, April, you'll be looking at him returning to the octagon. Probably May now, because obviously you got maybe Leon happens in March and April is available, or vice versa. I'd imagine Pereira would be on that card. And as a fight fan and an Adesanya fan, I would have liked to see Whittaker get that push up because Whittaker deserves it from the fight fan. And I also think Adesanya, I believe him when he thinks he and says he has a capability to beat Pereira. Sorry, we've seen it, throughout in all three fights, the capability for him to beat him. Obviously, a lot of people say that he won the first fight against Pereira, that or should have won it by decision, but didn't. He was winning the second fight and winning the fight on Saturday up until he wasn't, and that's the nature of the sport again, brutal sport. I do think that third round, again, I would take. You got to take the successes where they were. He looked good up until the perennial nerve went. He looked good, and he was controlling the fight. Of course, in my opinion, again, I'm not a coach or anything. I'd say get in the wrestling room, get in the wrestling room, get your jiu-jitsu up to scratch because it was slightly better than Pereira's. And the problem is, if you get the immediate rematch, there's the worry of getting in there too quickly and not progressing the game. You can tweak the game plans, but if he comes back in March, he's not going to improve where he needs to improve. But if he leaves it a year and a half, 2 years, then that leaves time for Pereira to go and progress. The discrepancies that we saw on Saturday night, just slight discrepancies that we saw in the skill set, it allows him to catch him up on the training with Glover Teixeira. Those will be polished up very quickly. Maybe there is a bit of a waiting game because again, Adesanya was 33, Pereira's 35. How long has he got top of the game? 3-4 years maybe. But again, Adesanya won't want that sole win against a retiring Pereira. He wants it in a fresh peak of his power Pereira. So it's a really interesting situation to be in. Whether you do make the immediate rematch, I would like to see it in July, maybe July, August time, maybe International Fight Week, if that's going to be the case. But I'd also, again, I'd like to see and wait to see what happens between Whittaker and Paulo Costa, because you know what I was going to say. Can you imagine Pereira versus Costa? Again, I put Pereira heavily favourite in there, but we've seen Costa consume. Put it in Brazil. Go and put it in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, and have an all-out Brazilian war between Pereira and Paulo Costa. Now that would be a bit difficult with Paulo Costa losing to both Whittaker and he beat Rockhold, but because he lost to Adesanya, so it would be difficult, to let him skip the queue. But again, if you beat Whittaker, you are the number one contender in my opinion, outside of Adesanya. But yeah, the Adesanya fan in me wants the immediate rematch because I believe he wants to and can win that fight, but I don't want him to rush it to the point where he's not able to relax, maybe, because he's been very active since getting into the UFC. I think he's had 14, 15 fights. He's fighting every 5 months, and he's been at 3 years, almost 4 years now. So he's been very active. He's been very consistent. He's been an exemplary champion, although I haven't said that he's been arrested tonight. So maybe that exemplary competitor is a little bit rocked at the moment, but at least as a professional and a competitor, he's been there when the UFC needed him. I think DC said he's been in 20% of the main events since he's become champion, or the pay-per-view main events, that is, which is phenomenal. And his work and his craft does deserve him an immediate rematch. But again, the opponent is where the question mark is. And I'd like to see him take 6, 7, 8 months off, maybe even a year, and see where the landscape is. Because again, if Whittaker goes and beats Paulo Costa, and then pulls off the win against Pereira, I know he wouldn't want to do it that way, but the landscape would say, Adesanya's beat Whittaker twice. There's more availability in him beating him a third time than beating Pereira a first time. So maybe he just needs to wait, sit back. There were some worrying comments in the post that press conference, which is worrying and concerning. So again, his health needs to come first, and now he's not champion and not got the obligation to defend his belt and keep that division moving. Maybe he can take a year out from the sport again. He's only young. Maybe he can bulk up a little bit. That's another option because Pereira did look bigger than him. I know Adesanya he's quite lean, but maybe they can put even 5-10 pounds on. Maybe that's a different way of doing it. Build up that power, maybe. But who knows? Adesanya's been in this game a long time. He knows his strengths, he knows his weaknesses, and so does everyone at City Kickboxing and Eugene, of course. But yes, let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Would you have an immediate rematch for Adesanya, or would you like to see where the division stacks up in a year or 6 months to a year's time? Because I think that's when we're going to probably see murmurings of when Adesanya's going to come back.